Sheriff. Sheriff David Hathaway is here to talk to us. Would you like to speak from up here or down there?
Sure, that's fine.
Give it up for Mr. Hathaway.
Thank you very much. I love events like this, being around fellow anarchists, voluntarists, libertarians. When I first asked Drew Heaton what I should talk about, I said, do you want me to talk about something safe and boring or something juicy and controversial? Now, if I recall correctly, I think Drew said safe and boring, but I'm not sure about that. Or maybe that conversation never happened. When I considered my topic today, I thought we could talk about some of the old news, the boring things like, that I stood up to the COVID mandates and the mask restrictions and the, social distance, businesses closing down. But that's kind of in the past, and we've all figured out that scam. I thought, well, I could talk about how is it possible that I can be an open anarcho-capitalist voluntarist and be an elected official when I go on all the major libertarian podcasts, Tom Woods, Scott Horton, Spike Cohen, David Knight, bashing the government all the time. How is it possible that I won in a landslide and I've started my campaign again and I think we'll win again? I could talk about after this next sheriff's election, I'm planning to run for Congress and to be an avowedly a peace candidate, anti-war candidate, just no war and really mean it. And I also thought about an article I wrote for Scott Horton's website about how there's no master planner, there's no big brain. Kind of in libertarian circles you hear about, it's all a plan, we're all being controlled. Davos, World Economic Forum. And I thought of talking about that, how actually the way it really works is people throw mud up against the wall, see what sticks. It's what I call reverse capitalism, or the market for evil, and then if something works, it gets traction, people glom onto it so they can get their piece of the pie. Let's pass a mask mandate in our county so we can get that CARES Act money. And then, what I thought I'd talk about, this is the thing that's going to make some people mad in here, or maybe not mad, but you'll disagree with me, but it's the next big scam that's coming. And all these scams where the government strives to get power, they usually have a moral element to them. And the reason they have the moral element is so that you won't oppose it, that you'll tolerate it, because you don't want to look like a weirdo, so you'll tolerate it. It's not that the whole nation really agrees with it, but the opposition tolerates it because of the moral component. Let me give you some examples, like alcohol prohibition from 1920 to 1933 had the moral component to it. You don't want the husbands and the dads going and just spending all the family's money on the evil elixir. And so, we need to banish alcohol, and it had kind of the Christian component. The Bible says drunkards will not enter the kingdom of heaven. So people that thought this isn't a good idea to give this much power to the government, they just kind of stayed silent. They went about their business. They didn't oppose it because they didn't want to look like they're in favor of people being drunk, being alcoholics, wasting all their living on drunkenness. So that one lasted for 13 years, 1920 to 1933. Let's look at some of the other things that have lasted a long time that also have a moral component to them. What about the Red Scare? The creeping communism. This worked for a long time. I would say it's almost entirely gone away now. But you look at the Vietnam War, we have to nip it in the bud, the Korean War, all these interventions in South America and Africa and Asia. You look at the stay behind armies after World War II in Europe that morphed into NATO, we need to fight the evil communist menace. And so, Americans, we have the position that we're a free country, free enterprise, capitalism. So you didn't want to oppose that, so it had kind of the moral element. You don't want to oppose that. You may be anti-war by nature and thinking this is costing a lot of money and a lot of lives, but you don't want to oppose it because you might be accused of being a communist sympathizer. So they have these elements to them. And of course, COVID had the moral element. You're going to kill grandma. My mask protects you, your mask protects me. You know, my vaccination protects you, your vaccination protects me. As a matter of fact, in my current campaign, I considered paying for a billboard that says, my tinfoil hat protects you, your tinfoil hat protects me. But anyway, so then I just thought, well, I'm going to talk about this, and this is the controversial thing, the latest big scam that's being rolled out. And surprisingly, it's a consequence of COVID. And it's kind of weird, like, why would this be a consequence of COVID? And I'm going to drop this on you now, and like I say, some are going to disagree with me, but I'm going to explain it to you. The whole, this is the new formula for government action that you're all supposed to buy into. The human smuggling, the human trafficking, the child sex trafficking. What's the worst thing you can call somebody? The worst thing, it doesn't matter if you're in Democrat circles, Republican circles, Libertarian circles, if you're in a school or in a prison or in a church setting, the worst thing you can call somebody is a pedophile. And even worse than that is organized pedophilia. So how did COVID morph into this latest scam? Well, COVID brought in things like Title 42, which was only a COVID mandate. Title 42 was a COVID restriction produced by the CDC, and it is only saying that foreigners can't apply for visas, apply for work permits, tourist visas, student visas, asylum, because of a virus. And when Donald Trump rolled it out, he said, well, Title 42 will keep America safe from a virus. And he also said, preserve good jobs for Americans. So along with this went a restriction on non-essential travel for foreigners. Now, millions of foreigners, millions of people in Mexico already had legal documents like 1B and 2B visas, tourist visas, work visas, and those were immediately invalidated because of the virus. Although Americans were allowed to travel to Mexico unlimited, you know, mingle, go back and forth, you know, and so this really wasn't, this is kind of disingenuous that it was for a virus thing. But anyway, that stayed on with the non-essential travel thing eventually went away. All the COVID protocols went away, the mask mandates, the social distance, the reduced occupancy, but one of them stayed. Title 42 stayed. Now, the people in government that rightfully recognized the COVID scam for what it was, they opposed every other COVID restriction except for Title 42. And it got to where Title 42 stayed on and stayed on and stayed on. And the same politicians that said COVID is a scam and we shouldn't have all these mask mandates, they wanted Title 42 to stay forever. And it just kept going on after there was no longer mask requirements on airplanes. All the other COVID restrictions had gone away. But Title 42 stayed on. And it started to go into this kind of weird, creepy, gray area where the same people that said COVID is a scam wanted this COVID mandates to stay forever. And what it made it even kind of creepier is nobody proposed Title 42 to be used on the Canadian border or to build a wall on the Canadian border. So it started to have this sort of anti-brown people sort of a feel to Title 42, the ones that wanted it to continue. But that doesn't sit well with a lot of people, you know, Christians and whatnot. They don't want to, you know, appear to be prejudiced. Now, I don't care if you discriminate. We all discriminate at a personal level. We may decide we only want to hang out with libertarians. You may only want to hang out with people of a certain religion or a certain social class. So that's fine if you discriminate individually. It would even be fun to for me to talk about, like, your opinions on differences in culture, religion, ethnicity, races. That's on you. And you would say you're an employer and you decide to discriminate on something like race or ethnicity. You may pay the cost in the market for doing that. You may lose good employees that are hired away from you by somebody else and lose out in the market. Or you may pay a social price If you individually decide to discriminate and you're verbal about that, then you may pay the price socially, and you may become a social pariah. But you shouldn't mandate collectively that people discriminate collectively against other ethnicities or other groups. So this was kind of weird. This thing continued on. The Title 42 continued on. And a lot of people didn't feel comfortable with kind of calling it what it was. So they needed a new moniker for this. Enter Tim Ballard. Tim Ballard, the one who did Operation Underground Railroad and the Sound of Freedom movie, which grossed more than any independent studio movie in history, $212 million. And Operation Underground Railroad, which Tim Ballard was the CEO of, took in $250 million. That's with a B. And then prominent people like Glenn Beck associated with Tim Ballard and made Tim Ballard the CEO of Operation Nazarene, which is Glenn Beck's funding mechanism for anti-human trafficking funding mechanism. Now, Tim Ballard, who is he? He's a Mormon, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He has 9 children. And so this began in Utah. And what he would do, he had the backing of the Attorney General of Utah, Sean Reyes, who actually signed up to go on his mission trips to Latin America with him. What he would do is recruit Mormon women and Mormon couples to go on these supposed missions with him, and he would have them pretend to be his wife. Your function is to be my wife and to be the wives of the men on my team. And why are we doing this? We have a thing called the couples ruse, and we have to make this real. So Tim Ballard would use these hundreds of millions of dollars to rent a private island that costs $25,000 a day in the Caribbean, take these teams down there to practice the couples ruse. And he would tell these Mormon women, look, the cartel members can smell your pheromones. They can tell if the chemistry is real. So you have to have actual physical chemistry with the man that I've assigned you to, and with the wife. And Tim Ballard had a wife, Catherine Ballard, but he would take a hairstylist as his pretend wife that would, stay all night with him. They would go to naked couples massages to practice the couples ruse. It's got to be believable. We got to have the physical chemistry. Now, these women felt very uncomfortable doing this, thinking they're going to save the children. And then Tim Ballard would start doing really creepy things like sending photos, text messages to them, with his groin area, just wearing underwear with temporary tattoos, and saying to these women, how far are you willing to go to save the children? Now, he would have them practice lap dances, and then these women reported this to the Attorney General of Utah, Sean Reyes, which is one of Tim Ballard's big supporters, and he had signed up to go on missions with Tim Ballard. He refused to investigate, so Davis County, Utah, which is North Salt Lake, took on the investigation and produced tens of thousands of pages of transcripts about all these things that Tim Ballard was doing. And it was really weird. On this, this private island, there was not even any alleged human trafficking on this island, but it was all for practice. And then Tim Ballard would talk about, we have this 70-page operations plan that's going to be how we're going to go save the children. And the people on the island with him that were doing this quote unquote training were saying, well, we'd like to see the operation plan. And Tim would say, well, you'll see it when you're ready to see it. Operational security and all that. You'll see it when you're ready to see it. And Tim would do weird things like busting into the hotel rooms of these other couples that he'd assigned to be pretend husband and wife, bust in multiple times in the middle of the night and say, why aren't you doing anything? You're sitting on the couch together. You got to get physical, and you got to make this real. The traffickers have to believe this. And, Tim Ballard would have these women come shower naked in front of him in his room and do the couples massages and the lap dances. And then eventually they said, look, we really need to see this operations plan. This seems weird. And all this was reported to the Attorney General of Utah, who's not investigating it because, he's on Tim Ballard's team. And Tim Ballard is planning to run for U.S. Senate in Mitt Romney's open seat as the anti-human trafficking crusader. So finally, Tim Ballard relented on the private island and said, okay, well, we got a synopsis. It's not really 70 pages. Here's the essence of what it is. So he disclosed a few-page document that was only a list of the massage parlors and strip clubs in the different countries that he wanted to visit. So, you know, at this point, they went to Davis County, Utah, and impaneled this investigation. Now, another weird thing that Tim Ballard did, while he was on this private island, where did he get his intelligence on these lost children that needed to be rescued? He went to a psychic, and he would have seances channeling the Mormon prophet Nephi, who was a Mormon prophet in about 600 BC. And all the intelligence he got about these kids that never panned out, it was never true, that movie Sound of Freedom was completely fictionalized. It all came from this lady named Janet Russin, this psychic on this island in the Caribbean. And when he came out to his team members, Tim Ballard would say, I've been downloading God. I've been downloading God. And God has been telling me about where these children are through the prophet Nephi. And they thought this was really weird. And then Tim Ballard, when they actually started going to strip clubs and massage parlors, he told the volunteer women, you got to go tell these people to set up an orgy for us and tell them that we're looking for a wilder scene, and trying to get them to set up with children, with juveniles, with whatever. And the best they could get is these women getting texted back by prostitutes that they had contacted down there with pictures of, well, we can do this and we can do that. And they sent pictures of adult women. And then the women, when they're traveling back to the U.S., told Tim Ballard, you know, if they do send us pictures of children, of child pornography, this is illegal when we cross through customs. This is a felony in the United States, you know. And it felt so weird. They go to Davis County, and Davis County does the very in-depth investigation. And finally, Tim Ballard does this. He goes to his buddy, Glenn Beck, who has a website called The Blaze, and a team of reporters. And he tells Glenn, look, this is getting out of hand. Can you produce a series of articles to make this go away? And Glenn Beck told his reporters he did the right thing and said, look, I don't want this to be true, but I want you to go find the truth. Talk to everybody. So they went and talked to 100 people. They talked to everybody. Glenn Beck, who was the big supporter, who had made Tim Ballard the CEO of Operation Nazarene, that was Glenn Beck's anti-human trafficking fundraising platform. So his reporters came back to him and showed Glenn Beck all the naked images and the picture of Tim Ballard in his underwear with his fake tattoos, telling the women, how far are you willing to go to save the children? And Glenn Beck came out publicly just recently and said, look, I've been duped by Tim Ballard. I apologize to all my donors for Operation Nazarene. He fired Tim Ballard from Operation Nazarene. And then Operation Underground Railroad, which had raised $250 million under Tim Ballard, fired him and fired his family members that were on the board of directors from Operation Underground Railroad. And then he was also fired from Operation Sabre and Operation Life and Liberty, other anti-human trafficking organizations that, since he was in disgrace. And then finally, Sean Reyes, just recently, the Attorney General of Utah, and he had been planning to run again as Attorney General. He was going to make his announcement in October. He had told people he was going to run. And now, with all the negative press on him being part of this sex pervert Tim Ballard's operation, has apologized and has opened an investigation. So, you know, the next phase is even weirder. Tim Ballard is in denial of all this. He just kicked off his new season of his podcast by interviewing none other than Donald Trump as his main guest for his new season. And Donald Trump had Tim Ballard on one of his public-private NGO partnership committees as the head of that committee, anti-human trafficking thing. And, you know, I'm going to kind of drag this over, kind of, you know, hesitatingly, unwillingly, to the libertarian world. that a lot of libertarians, there's a schism on this whole issue of borders and immigration, and I understand that. And some of my best friends kind of hold the position that the government should get out of everything except border enforcement, some of my best friends. And it so happens that they're associated with what I would call the Austro-libertarian movement, which I am as well. I believe that Austrian economics better explains human action than anything else. And I read all the way back to Turgot and Bombarvik and Karl Menger and, the more modern one, Bob Higgs, Guido Hulsmann, Hans Hermann Hoppe. And I didn't understand how Austrian economists call the state a gang of thieves, that taxation is robbery. And the central planning never works. It didn't work for the Soviets, and it doesn't work for America. How can they still propose robbery to keep this aspect of the state going? And how can they propose central planning to make macroeconomic prescriptions for a whole segment of society? You can't do this. You can't associate with these people, or you have to associate with those people. Like, I have property near the border in 2 counties in Arizona, ranch property, Santa Cruz County and Cochise County. To me, it should be purely based on private property. There should be no welfare if the welfare is a magnet for people to come in, even though native-born Americans are 3 times as likely to go on welfare as immigrants that come into work. But I should be able to sell a house or rent a house to whoever I want, or hire whoever I want. As long as it's a voluntary transaction, voluntarism, then, it should be allowed. I should be able to buy and sell with anybody, an American, a foreigner, anyone I want. So I didn't understand why these individuals held that view if they are purely anarchists. And I understand some people in this room aren't purely an anarchist. I am, even if that seems kind of hypocritical with me being a sheriff, but I don't even think, these structures that I work in are market creations. I think we need price signals to show what the market really wants for everything. Maybe with my office, they wouldn't exist at all, or it would be bigger, or people would do their own private security if you weren't forcing people to pony up their money through taxation. But anyway, I went on a personal journey to try to understand everything that was written by these people in the world of Austrian economics that are also libertarians, of why they want the state involved in border enforcement and immigration. So I wrote a book, and I have some copies of the book here. Scott Horton did the introduction on the book. William Norman Grigg, I hope his memory has not faded away, a great justice advocate. He also wrote a blurb for the book. And what it does is it goes point by point through every issue raised by certain Austro-economists, and this isn't all of them. There's people like Bob Higgs, Austrian economist, who thinks this is total bunk. He wants the state out of everything. But it goes point by point on all the things that are being used by kind of the Austro-libertarians, and I love them, and they're some of my best friends, and I hang out with them, and, I talk to them, I write articles for their websites and whatnot. But it was just my personal journey, and I turned it into a book to kind of refute, using Austrian economics, those that would want to keep the government involved in border enforcement. And Scott Horton pointed out in his introduction to my book that there's been these progressive Supreme Court cases that have now made Border Patrol the most powerful police force in the U.S. They now have power within 100 miles of the international boundary to stop you for no reason. They don't need probable cause. They can detain you, interview, interrogate you, search your car. And this is the Supreme Court has dictated this. They call it Extended Border Search Authority. Now, that 100-mile zone from the international boundary covers 2/3 of the population of the U.S. The U.S. has a population of 340 million. Over 200 million people are in this, what Scott Horton calls the Constitution-free zone. It includes places like San Diego, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., Miami, New Orleans, Houston, El Paso. And I think Americans don't really realize how this is the new police state. This is how the police state is going to enter into the equation. And now you have not just the Mormons, and as a matter of fact, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has sharply rebuked and reprimanded. They used to publish Tim Ballard's, all his material in his books. They have now told him that he is a moral reprobate and he needs to repent and he needs to get right with God. And of course, Sean Reyes has turned against him, the Attorney General of Utah. And now Tim Ballard is silent about the campaign for Senate. He was going to get endorsed by Trump and by Sean Reyes. And now with all this, following him around, biting him in the heels, he was supposed to announce mid-October, no longer announcing a run for Mitt Romney's Senate seat, his open Senate seat, as the anti-human trafficking crusader in the U.S. Senate. So, that's kind of about it. I just kind of want to wind up by saying, these scams that they come along with, they always have a moral element. Nobody wants to be accused of being a pedophile or being in favor of human trafficking. So it's kind of easy to glom onto these things and say like, yeah. The U.S. government needs to get out everything except border enforcement, more money for Border Patrol. But now the evangelicals, even those started in the Mormon world, are now carrying the water for Tim Ballard. You used to go see church bulletins, they would say, pray for our first responders. Now they say, pray for Border Patrol. Border Patrol is now like the Messiah, now like the second coming of Christ. And so this is to me just kind of the crazy new thing. And I was risking people thinking I'm a wacko by coming and telling you this. But this is the new thing that you're not supposed to oppose. You don't want to look like a pedophile. You don't want to look like a weirdo. And I want to not take too long up here. I want to take time for questions. I do have copies of my book up here that Scott Horton wrote the introduction to. I have some magnetic calendars that didn't have any taxpayer funding, just purely private advertisers that we produced this Sheriff David Hathaway 2024 calendar. If you have a good question, I'll give you one of these things, or if you want one of these things. It could be about anything. It could be about what I'm talked about. It could be about something else, or maybe my plans to run for Congress. And I don't know if that microphone is hot over there, but I'd be happy to take any questions on any subject. Okay, going once. Oh yeah, over there.
Hi, my name is James Parasho. I'm from
Hi,
Navajo
James.
County.
Okay.
I'm really interested to see you. I'm hoping to make my own bid for sheriff one day. In Navajo County, we have Sheriff David Klaus, and I have a question for you as how I should propose something to him. In Navajo County, we have the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest. This is a tract of land that is controlled by allegedly controlled by the federal government, largely in contradiction to the powers of Congress set forth in the Constitution. David Klaus holds himself up as a constitutional sheriff, and for most things I would agree with that. However, I would like to ask you, what is your approach on federal management of state lands that is not an abidance by the Constitution, and how would you recommend I approach him about that subject?
Yeah, wow, that's a really good question. I've had a lot of experience of that, being part of the ranching community and ever since my great-great-grandparents, and have had a lot of negative interactions with the federal government. In the early years, like my great-grandfather, my grandfather, there was no such thing as Forest Service back then, and this was even before Arizona became a state in 1912. And now you have all these federal mandates for ranchers and for everybody else and for land usage. The main thing I could recommend is that your sheriff, Sheriff Klaus, and I know him, that he doesn't do any cooperative agreements with the federal government to do enforcement on federal land. It should be public land, and it's crazy to me. I own a ghost town up in the Huachuca Mountains. That's just part of our ranch land. It's 62 acres. It has national forest property on all four sides, and it's crazy that they will every now and then just declare nobody can pass through the national forest because it's fire season or something else, but it's supposed to be public land, and so what I do is I don't agree to do any of the things that the federal government wants to do. All their funding always has strings attached to it, and I pulled out of, we were receiving money with strings attached for a federal drug task force, and they would take control of my people and have them run by federal supervisors. I had no control over what they do. I wish I had a better answer other than him just treating that as just land that's in his coverage area, that's in his county, and help the people with whatever they need, and don't make these cooperative arrangements with the federal government, which there's usually money involved, but then there's strings attached. Did that doesn't seem like a good answer, but is there any more to that? That's pretty fair.
I do have a follow-up. What steps do you believe that sheriffs in Arizona could take to try to get federal agencies to leave their counties?
Well, the sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer of the county. Historically, the sheriff was a creation under English common law. What's that? Yeah, the chief law enforcement officer for the county. It's a carryover from English common law. At the time of the founding fathers, there was no police departments. Robert Peel in London created the London police force. That was replicated, and they made Chicago Police Department, New York. And all these Johnny-come-lately three-letter federal agencies, they're all creations of the 1900s. They were created during my dad's lifetime. The FBI in the 1900s, the DEA in 1973, created by Nixon. The ATF. None of these things had any constitutional basis at the founding of this country. So technically, it's only supposed to be the sheriff. These police departments have come along in the 1800s, like I said. So the main thing they can do is deny the federal government access to things that are unconstitutional, as the gentleman pointed out there. Like, they're supposed to notify me, and sometimes they don't, and I chew them out. If they want to do a search warrant or an activity in Santa Cruz County, as the chief law enforcement officer, even the federal government is supposed to tell me, we're planning to do a search warrant over at this residence, or surveil this property over there. In my county, there's a very, very, very heavy federal government presence, way more than Navajo County. Yeah. Federal agents outnumber local agents 30-1. There's 30 federal officers for every one local officer. So it's pretty hard for me to just say to them, get out of town. But they're supposed to notify me, and obviously I won't cooperate on anything and almost everything is unconstitutional. I won't cooperate on any firearms things. If anybody wants their permits for their machine guns and they're supposed to send me the notifications, I say yes to everything, because it's constitutional. The right to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. And all the COVID stuff, I went against that. I went against state officials and federal officials on that. This is a violation of First Amendment. Why are you shutting down churches? Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion. So he has that authority to shut down the federal government, but he would need to tell them, you have to notify me when you're in my county, which they do, and then just say, sorry, I don't approve that operation.
Thank you very much for taking my questions.
Well, yes. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. As an elected anarchist, how do you reconcile the morality of being paid with taxpayer dollars, and how do you use your position to influence the culture of your locality in a direction that favors liberty? That's an excellent question, and Mark Victor, the Attorneys for Freedom, he's up in Chandler, asked me that very question, how do you... since I don't think even the sheriff's office is a market creation, and I thought about just not taking the salary at all, but the problem with that is those funds are fungible and they would hire somebody else with that money. So I do take the salary and try to give it away as much as possible, because there are people who have paid into it. And the sheriff's offices, I know sheriff's offices are being held in high regard right now, but there's a lot of things they do that you wouldn't like. Like, for example, people say, I never own my property because I have to pay property taxes, so I never really own it because the government will take it away from me. Well, guess who's going to come take your property away from you if you don't pay your taxes? The sheriff's office will do that. They'll come take your property away from you. They're the civil and criminal arm of the local courts, the superior courts of Arizona. But yeah, it is hard to reconcile that, and Mark Victor responded to me on his podcast saying he has that same conundrum. Like, he represents a lot of people that have been charged with victimless crimes, like, drug crimes. He doesn't believe in those crimes, but he'll have an opportunity to maybe
take a guilty plea for a client and really save them a lot of time in jail, and he'll look at all of it and look at the evidence against them, and just sometimes he decides to take the 5-year plea or the probation plea. It's basically saying that his client is guilty of breaking the law when he doesn't even believe in those laws in the first place. But yeah, that's a good question, and I don't know why it hasn't come back to bite me in the rear, because I'm always saying to groups like this and on podcasts that the government's illegitimate. Everything they do is illegitimate. But so far, I don't know if people don't know how to use Google in my county, but I'm sure they figured out that that's my position, and I'm always writing articles in the local paper too, complaining about everything that that the government does. But yeah, good question. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, go ahead. And if I ever get on I want to stay here as long as you guys want. If I ever come up on some hard point where you need to break for the debate setup or something, just start waving at me. But I love answering questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks for coming out and talking about these things. It's really important. I really kind of want to get a little bit back to the first question and kind of give you an opportunity to put some legs under the answer in a practical sense. Obviously, we have ways to access our legislatures and say, hey, this is what we want, and for us to cast a longer shadow than we really are in stature and impress upon the legislature, hey, libertarians are out there, we mean business, listen to us. How do we access our elected sheriffs? What's the best way? Can we knock on the sheriff's office door and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you?
I have some sad stories about that, but Drew Heaton and I know an individual named Julie Wentz who opposed all of the COVID decrees in Arizona that all your data had to be shared if you took the shot, shared with the CDC every 24 hours, and they had a surveillance order that put in place, executive order by Ducey, and Ducey kept this state of emergency for COVID, and the statutes say that within 24 hours he can only operate under martial law with emergency powers for 24 hours before he has to convene a special session of the legislature. So this individual, Julie Wentz, that Drew Heaton and I know, she made a big deal out of this and wrote all these orders to the sheriffs and everybody, and she was going to have an informative meeting to get all the sheriffs as the only ones that could stand up to this. And she said, how do I contact them? I said, well, there's a sheriff's association. I'll give you all the emails. She sent them out, did an invitation to all the police chiefs and all the sheriffs. Nobody agreed to come except me. And, I'm not trying to toot my own horn by saying that, but sheriffs are political creatures. They lick their finger and put it up to see which way the wind is blowing. And if they decide that something is politically correct to maybe go along with the COVID mandates, and their counties are probably getting money under the CARES Act for the COVID stuff, they will decide it's not politically expedient to oppose something. So they're not just purely motivated by virtue and doing the right thing. They're getting a paycheck, they have power, they have what St. Augustine called the libido dominandi, the lust to rule, like some people have that, it's for money or it's for power or status. They kind of don't want to put a bullseye on themselves for the people that they think would oppose that. But I have that, and that was months in the making, and I helped her contact the other sheriffs to help undo the state government's unconstitutional decrees that were illegal, and she even sent them legal notices saying this is illegal. You have to convene a special session of the legislature. You can't just operate under martial law, under emergency power. And we got no traction from any of the sheriffs except me. And thankfully, when I referred her to Tom Woods, she went on his podcast and said, well, Sheriff Hathaway is the only one that agreed to come to my thing. And we have people in Arizona that call themselves constitutional sheriffs, but when it comes to putting some skin in the game, this was in the midst of the whole COVID thing. They thought, well, yeah, this is unconstitutional, shutting down churches, all the social distance, forcing people to wear masks. But they didn't want to put their skin in the game and come together as a group and oppose this and potentially go against the governor. And I did. I went against the governor. I would go to the media and say he's wrong, but
Yeah.
But I wish I had better answer than that. But they are political creatures, so maybe they have the power, but they're not willing to use the power if they think it's going to harm them for the next election because they want to get elected again.
All right. So it sounds like a challenge, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And here's one of my magnetic calendars. I meant to give them out to people who ask questions, but no taxpayer funds used to make that. And as I'm seeing if there's any more questions, if anybody wants this book, that I did in conjunction with Scott Horton, I can either give you one now or I'm sitting right over there by Drew Heaton. You can come get one from me.
Thank you, Sheriff Hathaway. Great talk. So I'm from California. I do have a member who's an anarchist as well that's looking to run for sheriff. What is the best, I know it's different than Arizona, obviously, and it's the Bay Area of all places, so let's get the booze out now. What advice would you give someone that's looking, as an anarchist looking to run for sheriff, what's the best advice that you could give someone running in the Bay Area in California? It's not me, it is a member that we have.
What I did is kind of what you would think is counterintuitive. I just took it all head on and I just spoke very direct, and people told me I cost myself the election when I went against the mask and I went against everything. I went against the county attorney in my county that wanted to make it mandatory to take the shots for county employees, and I said, no, absolutely not, I won't support that, I don't like that, and then they shut down the idea. But during the campaign, I was against all this stuff. The local paper did multiple hit pieces on me. They just tried to crucify me over this issue, and it generated more online comments to their online edition than any article they'd ever written. They're usually 1 or 2 or no comments. It had over 300 comments. So people, even relatives, told me, David, you shot yourself in the foot. You lost the election. Why don't you just go along with this and wear the mask? And I said, well, if the voters are that dumb, then I deserve to lose. But you can think that there's a strain out there of everybody's going along with this stuff, but really they just don't, they want to keep their head down. They don't agree with it, even if they're part of some political sort of faction out there that's kind of supporting, where the mouthpieces for those organizations are supporting the latest government scam. Individuals are just keeping their head down, and when they vote in private, they tend to still vote for freedom. So all I can really say, advice on that question, is a great question. All I did was be openly the way I am, just pro-freedom, against these government interventions, saying all the time, I don't want to run any of your lives. You know how to run your life and make your own health decisions. And I never spoke about a crisis. Many sheriff campaigns and political campaigns talk about a crisis. You need to give me more money so I can hire more people, more DUI checkpoints, a bigger drug task force, keep you safe. And unfortunately, I'm kind of making this comment against older people, but I'm an older person, so I can do it. I'm 64. Arizona has a lot of a snowbird population that aren't really familiar with the realities of, say, the border stuff and whatnot. So it's easy to scare people, but I never used the scare tactic on campaigning. I was just supportive, support people's families, support their rights to run their own lives. And it may, in the media, appear that that's going the wrong way, that you're going to lose. But ultimately, with 6 candidates, I was running with 6 candidates, I won in a landslide, and I got 4 times as many votes as the guy who came in second place. So the message of freedom really does resonate if you don't hide from it. Yeah. Yeah, excellent. Anybody else? Drew, are you shutting me down, or are you asking a question?
No. I just want to give a plug for the book. It's a great thing, and I wrote a piece on the border, which you have not in writing endorsed, but if you're interested, it's over at my table. And if you can't get enough of
I have it right here. I got you.
Sheriff Hathaway, we do meet in the Pima County Libertarian Party once a week. Every week we meet, and every month we have a speaker come in. Sheriff Hathaway is our scheduled May 16th, and I thought it's true. You give a great challenge for libertarians. I think I get asked a lot of times, well, why don't you run more for, have more candidates? And I think, well, as a group, we just kind of don't like government, but we really need to stand in these positions like Sheriff Hathaway so that we can be a protectorate. It's not that we want to rule over anybody's life, it's that we want to be a protectorate in that place. And so thank you for that. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about how you stood in opposition to the rest of the sheriffs in this state on civil asset forfeiture.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. The sheriffs have something called the Arizona Sheriff's Association. There's 15 counties in Arizona, so all 15 sheriffs are members of that. And they do things where they try to get unanimity on policy positions. And one of the things, there have been multiple ones that I've opposed. One of them was to get a unanimous letter to oppose a change to a state law on civil asset forfeiture. The way the law had been is that a cop can take your money and seize it and forfeit it, and then it's up to you to show that it was legitimate or that it was from legitimate sources. So they didn't have to have an underlying crime. They could just pull you over. Whoa, you got $20,000 in a brown paper bag next to you in the car. I'm going to take that. And then the procedure was as follows. You have to file a claim and cost bond, and then they have a hearing. You know, you're not innocent until proven guilty. You have to show tax returns or whatnot, pay stubs to show legitimate source of that income or show when you took it out of a bank account. And that's totally bogus. You know, that's punishing somebody that hasn't been accused of a crime. Now, if it was, say, for example, you robbed the Circle K and they stole $500 and they look at the footage and they see it's you, and then somebody pulls you over and finds that $500, it's fruits of a crime. Or like I have 9 children. If somebody kidnapped one of my children and then I paid them $10,000 ransom, and then somebody follows them and takes the $10,000. Okay, that's the fruits of a crime. And so what the proposal was that all the sheriffs opposed is to change that law to say that there has to be an underlying conviction for a crime before the government can forfeit that money. So like, let's say there was a bank robbery and they recover the money and the government can hang on to it until there's a conviction. If there's no conviction, you know, if they can't prove their case, then it's returned. So they wanted it to be unanimous, and they called me on the phone and harassed me and emailed me. And their paper was, they wanted it to be unanimous, signed by all the sheriffs in the Arizona, to the governor and to the legislature, saying this: these funds are very important for our operations. We have come to rely on these funds from civil asset forfeiture. You cannot make these changes to the law. And it was a very small change. The law basically stayed intact, saying they can take your money pending forfeiture, but it cannot be forfeited until there's a conviction for an underlying crime. And they imposed it tooth and nail. And they all unanimously signed this, and I refused to sign it. That letter still went forward to the governor and to the legislature, but it wasn't unanimous. And the good news is that change went through the legislature and it became law to where now they have to have, at least on the state side, not with the federal government. A lot of local police agencies seize your money and they give it to like the FBI or DEA, which quote unquote adopts the seizure for federal forfeiture, and then they give 80% back to the seizing agency. So now all they can do is just go straight to the federal government to adopt that seizure. But on the state side, they now have to have an underlying conviction. So that's one example. And, you know, as to Drew's initial point about running for things, you know, let's just say that you're in your mind kind of a defeatist and you're resigned to the fact, I'm going to lose, I can't win this thing. You should still run anyway for anything you're thinking of running for, because it's a free platform to access the media, to say your position on things, to say the libertarian position, to hearken back to the founding fathers. We're supposed to be a free country and running our own lives. So a lot of the media, like down in my county, they'll give you a free full-page interview that you don't have to pay for. The local radio station will have you on. And if nothing else, it's a learning opportunity. Even if you're resigned to the fact you're going to lose, still you should run for things just so that you can get the message out there, so you can kind of teach your position. Yes, go ahead.
Do I need to kick it? Hello? Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Sheriff, so have you noticed in your constituents since you were first elected a shift? Because your power is that you stand in your truth. You just stand in the truth, and that's what resonates with people. Have you noticed a shift in the media in Nogales or just on the street, how people are more supportive when before they were not?
Yeah, I definitely have. You could think maybe it would go the reverse. Now that they know the real me, that I really mean it when I talk about freedom, that maybe they would become less supportive because I didn't want my people reporting to the federal government and the task force. I wanted them to report to the sheriff's office. So I stopped taking that federal money. You'd think, well, is there going to be backlash once they know that I really mean what I say? But no, it just seems like the support has grown. And my wife that's sitting over there at the table with Drew Heaton, she helps me on campaigning. We do old school traditional campaigning. We knock on thousands of doors, and then my wife, bless her heart, follows all that door knocking up with a traditional handwritten letter, not a form letter. And we don't look at the petition process as a curse. We get 10 times as many signatures as we're supposed to have, which is the maximum limit, because we're harvesting an address. My wife writes them a letter that's personalized to them. If they said their son's in the hospital for cancer, she'll inquire about their son. She takes notes as we talk to people. And nowadays nobody gets a letter. That's another campaign tactic you might want to keep in mind. Everything's text message and email and social media. So people actually, that get a letter, they'll come up to my wife when we're in the store and give her a hug and say, oh, I still keep your letter. It's so great that I got, you'd think in this generation, my generation, you'd get a letter, you'd get something from your grandma or a birthday card, but a lot of people nowadays have never gotten anything in the mail. So that's just like marketing 101. You touch them once when you talk to them at their door, you touch them twice when they get the letter, you solidify the relationship. So I've learned a lot of just kind of that basic marketing skills also to put in the legwork to promote ourselves. And once again, I never talk about a crisis to anybody. It's always like, how's your family doing? Every conversation I have, everything I do in the media is never, elevating some crisis where you need me to solve that crisis. And that has worked for me. And I think the support has grown. I don't want to be premature and count our chickens before they're hatched, but I think this next election is going to be a big victory as well. So I think the support has grown, and we just stay friendly, and we're just not angry and mean. We're just happy talking on the media and happy talking in person, and not just trying to scare people about some big crisis. So I would expect to win again. And then there's a law in Arizona called the Resign to Run law. So if I do run for Congress, I need to do it in the last year of my next term, because if you're in the last year of your term, you don't have to resign. So that means I can actually campaign as sheriff, as a sitting sheriff for Congress. So I think that would help. Anything else? Okay. Yeah.
When you run for Congress, I think everyone in this room will support you strongly. Have you considered running as a candidate for the Libertarian Party?
Well, I don't want to get into the subject of political reality, and even Ron Paul, which is a great candidate. He tried running as Libertarian, tried running as Republican. I hate to get into that discussion because it sidetracks people from their true principles of like, what's the chance of winning? And, that people will make that decision on voting for people that has the best chance of winning. I think, that's a very honest, good thing to do. But, in my county, I don't know. I don't think that would fly. And I think even just looking at the latest tallies from the last elections here in Tucson and Pima County, it's just if you're campaigning for something where there's, I don't know, where there's the kind of feeling of the two-party thing, which I call the uniparty, that people will just say, oh, you got no chance of winning or something like that. So I don't know. That's something I would consider doing, but kind of winnability. Like, I don't change my core values, no matter how I run. It would be like Ron Paul ran as a Republican, but he doesn't hold a lot of the what are considered traditional Republican positions on war and things like that. So, I don't know. Yeah, but I would consider that. Yeah. Yeah.
First of all, you were a very engaging speaker. Thank you. I'm also an anarchist and get a lot of the same questions. But I would say to the libertarians in the audience, you drive on tax-funded roads and use all kinds of other services. This is not just a question that anarchists need to answer.
Right.
But if you ran for Congress and won, and then you decided you weren't going to win again, not win again, run again. You were done. You wanted to just enjoy the rest of your life, and you didn't have to worry about the winnability aspect. Would you consider midterm switching to the Libertarian Party?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, well then we're going to hold you to that.
Yeah, definitely. You know, in Congress is a weird thing, like the House of Representatives, it's every 2 years, so they're kind of always campaigning, whereas Senate is every 6 years. But yeah, I think the makeup of my district, I kind of have a lot of Hispanic people in my district. I speak Spanish, and about half of what I do is Spanish media. It would make a weird reality show. I spend a lot of time going across the line into Mexico to go on TV and radio and whatnot. I do a whole lot of media. Sometimes I do 20 interviews a week, and of course all the major US media, Fox News, ABC, CBS, NBC, PBS, and Telemundo, Univision. So that's kind of an advantage I have in my district, is speaking Spanish, and the family is known there. We're a ranching family for many generations, so that kind of works in my favor too in that district. So, but yeah, I would definitely consider that. But you know, actually don't like the politics stuff. Like, you know, in a room like this, I feel at ease with everybody. But you know, I'm around, you know, cops and county board of supervisors and people like that all the time that are trying to play, you know, their political angles to get more money and more prestige for themselves. So I don't have a lot of. I get along fine with everybody, but it's not philosophical camaraderie like I would have in this room. And I actually would rather just be working on the ranch. Like, my favorite thing to do is go on our ranch up in the mountains in the pine trees, and where my cell phone doesn't work, and just cut firewood and work on the wells and things like that. So that's actually my favorite thing to do. Anything else? Looks like we.
One. So I'm Beverly Cobble from Maricopa County, and I live with a mental illness. So because of that, I am at risk of being assaulted by the police, being forced medications, and forced confinement. So I wonder, as a libertarian, how would you address folks who do live with debilitating psychological disorders?
Yeah, well, to kind of go back to my fundamental point, I don't think the police in this in this country, as they exist now, are a market creation. So they have qualified immunity, which means they won't get sued for that, or they won't get held liable in a criminal. They may get sued, but they won't get held liable in a criminal court for abusing you. I wish I had a better answer, but a lot of the police know they have qualified immunity, and they're arrogant, and it attracts a personality type that was maybe the guy who was the bully in middle school and throwing his weight around, but now he can make you stop and make you endure his lecture. So, man, you know, I would say use a camera whenever you have interaction with police, if that's possible, or have a friend do it, although they may try to seize it. And this is another law that I opposed, that the Sheriff's Association wanted to make it be illegal to film police in law enforcement in Arizona, and so I oppose that as well. So I don't feel like that's a really good answer to just say, look, they're bullies and you're just kind of on your own. But I think to ensure accountability, if you can at least hold up a cell phone and video them, or pretend like you're videoing them, have a witness, travel with somebody else as much as possible. Because yeah, I've seen a lot of that during the COVID era. And sorry, I don't have a better answer.
Yeah, I have a question around those same lines with the bully mentality you see with some of the officers that are out there. Is there anything you can do from an organizational level at your side to kind of make being an officer less of an incentive for them to want to continue to do that?
You know, it's funny. I had long discussions with an organization called the Thin Red Line that had this idea that a sheriff, or a constitutional sheriff, could change the culture in his agency. The problem is that most officers, they go home and they want the kids to think that daddy's a good guy. And I think that taxation is theft, that it's robbery, and that they enforce these laws. They're mandated to enforce the laws. They go through the Peace Officer Academy in Arizona, and they're told you have to enforce these laws, including the drug laws, the victimless crime laws. So I can't get them to philosophically agree with me on all those things. So they want to appear to be a good guy and not to be in a profession that's an illegitimate profession. So I think they're going to kind of continue, just by the nature of why people go to those jobs and retain those jobs, want to still look at them as the good guy, even though they're living on taxpayer money and even though they're arresting people for victimless crimes. They're not going to just make that philosophical shift. And I've thought that through with other people, and I can see just kind of me doing the example of the libertarian example, but there's certain things I can't oppose. Like, I'll get thrown in jail if I dishonor a court order. Like, I have a big jail. I have a jail that has 377 bed capacity, that I'm in charge of that jail. Now, let's just say that somebody's accused of a victimless crime and they get convicted by the Superior Court in my county, and they're told you have to serve 6 months in the jail. Now, I can't say I don't believe in, I could, but then I would be held in contempt of court. I can't say I don't believe in this. This is a victimless crime. And immediately there's an order from the judge that says to the sheriff of Santa Cruz County, this prisoner is hereby remanded to your custody to be retained for 6 months. Like, I am violating that court order and I'm in contempt of court. I could do that one time and then the judge would order me to be arrested. So there's certain little confines that I work in where unfortunately there's things happening that I don't believe in. But as far as like changing the culture, other than trying to be an example, I can't change people's motivations. Some of them just come in and they want to be tough. They want to break down doors. They want to pull people over. They want to write a bunch of tickets, and they think that they're personally justified in doing it. They think it's, they may buy into something like the social contract type of a thing. Like, oh no, you have to pay your taxes and you have to abide by what the authorities tell you to do, and they want to look at themselves as a good guy. So a lot of what I say would be an insult to them, like spitting in their face to that personality type. So I can't just shift people in that agency to become philosophically aligned with, non-aggression principle and things like that. I try. I have discussions like that, but I can't compel them to say not arrest somebody for something that is a crime, because they'll report me to somebody and then I'll be investigated for public corruption, that I'm protecting criminals. So I do my best. I tell them, you don't have to arrest anybody. There's no quota for speeding tickets. There was before I came in with the previous sheriff. No, you're not going to be evaluated on a quota. And, you do have discretion on things. You can, somebody who's inebriated, you can go talk to them and you can help them get safely home, like cops did when I was a kid. When somebody was drunk, they'd help you get home instead of thinking maybe they're going to, ruin your life and get you into the criminal justice system. I do encourage what's called diversion programs, alternatives to incarceration. I work hand in hand with a judge down there that also believes in those things, like to get people into other programs other than in incarceration. But I know that's kind of a circuitous answer and I'm kind of avoiding the main issue, but I think the answer is no, I haven't been successful in attempts to change the culture from the inside. Hi, Drew.
I just love hearing you answer questions. So could you tell everybody more about your volunteer sheriff program?
Oh, yeah.
And it's, it's something that I had talked to some people here in Pima County, and they kind of rolled their eyes, and then I realized, oh yeah, they do have a volunteer sheriff program here already, but it is pretty laughable that they don't get a lot of, they're frowned upon. But I think what is happening here in Pima County is very different from what you are doing in Santa Cruz. And so could you just let people know what you're doing in Santa Cruz with your volunteer sheriff without taxpayer dollar program?
Yeah, I can deputize anybody to be a deputy sheriff. The problem is we have an insurance policy with the county, and if that person does something rash, then they're not covered by our insurance policy. The way we get around that, they have to go through a training program. And we're one of the only volunteer deputy sheriff programs where they carry firearms. Like the Pima County volunteer deputies do not carry firearms, but we go out to the range, we train them in, shoot, no shoot type situations, firearm safety, the legalities of, using defensive force and whatnot. And they get legal classes and, vehicle training. But you can't tell our volunteer deputies from a regular deputy. They have the same marked vehicles. They take home their vehicle. They wear the same uniform. As a matter of fact, anybody that's not in Santa Cruz County can also be a volunteer deputy in my county. You can't do the take-home vehicle out of the county per our policy, but the only requirement is you have to put in 16 hours a month, which is, no big deal. You can do it at the county fair or at the Tubac Arts Festival or something like that. But to Drew's point, I doubled the size of our volunteer deputy program. We're a small county. Territory-wise, we're the smallest county in Arizona, but population-wise, we're not. So I figured, well, to cover the county more effectively without raising taxes, I didn't want to ever suggest that we should raise taxes to hire more people. I thought I'll do it with volunteers, and the volunteers have better motivations. They're not motivated to just go pull people over and lecture people. They don't have that cop mentality. They put on the friendly face for their communities, like Sonoyta, Arizona is in my county. It's kind of a wine district, a tourist destination. A lot of movies were filmed out there, John Wayne movies and whatnot. They put on a happy face for the sheriff's office, and they're not under any kind of a feeling that they have to, arrest people or do anything like that. So I doubled the size of the volunteer force, of my volunteer deputy force when I came in, for the express purpose of providing more coverage with people who had good motivations, and it wouldn't cost the taxpayers any additional money. We also have a volunteer search and rescue program that's purely volunteers, and they go out often, in the worst kind of weather when people are lost, and go to search and rescue people. That's also a volunteer program. We've also doubled the size of that since I've been sheriff. If anybody's interested in those type of things, our volunteer deputy program, we don't put a class on very often, like maybe once every 2 years, so we kind of maintain a list, and then when we get enough people to put on another class, it's kind of a bit of trouble to put on the class. We have to get the county attorney's office to do the legal training and whatnot. But actually, if you're up here in Pima County, you can do it if you're willing to go down to Santa Cruz County and put in 16 hours every month. Is that it? All right. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure for me to come here. And if anybody wants one of these books about the immigration thing from the Austrian economics perspective, or one of my magnetic calendars, I'm sitting right over there.